It's the study is not done. We have more to analyze, but I think that this gives a clean sense that this is pretty much a sexually transmitted infection. The things that were not significant of being the insertive partner. Fisting in our study was not associated. It appears to be a lot less commonly done in New York than in some other European cities. Use of injection drugs, while we know definitely transmits Hep C, was not what was doing it by and large in this group. Okay, so let me tell you about some of the good side about our treatment, which has been successful. One of the reasons why it's so important to identify these infections. So the 53 cases, we have just 5 who spontaneously cleared, a few still being evaluated, and some who deferred or refused therapy. So of the 34 people who were started on therapy, we used pegylated interferon and ribavirin. And the therapy was initiated between 2 and 22 months after the first noted increase in their liver tests, basically how most of the people were found. So of those, 2 were lost to follow-up. 1 has finished treatment, but we don't have the off-treatment measurement of cure yet, and 15 are still on treatment. That's the timer. And 16 then were assessed for sustained virological response or cure. Of those, 4 failed. 1 never was suppressed, 2 relapsed on treatment, and 1 relapsed after treatment, and for a success rate here of 75%. And this was in a group that was initiated kind of broadly between 2 and 22 months after actual diagnosis. They'd been infected longer. And our just observation with small numbers, that 3 of 4 failed, did have treatment initiated more than 6 months after their diagnosis. Possible implications there. So finally, actually what I have to say is considered to be the bad news. Okay, so 30 of our patients underwent liver biopsy. A median of 4.4 months after first detection of the ALT elevation of liver test abnormalities. Okay, and this is what seen. You saw one slide of it, and this is the dark blue of the periportal fibrosis, and this is the distribution of the stages, and this is. I thought I'd turn this off completely. But you can see it's basically 3/4 of people had stage 2 to stage 3 fibrosis in this very early period. And lest anyone think that this is something that happens in all people with acute hepatitis C, and maybe somehow it gets better on its own before getting worse again years later, in 2 studies of HIV negative people who had biopsies, you can see that they basically all have no fibrosis. In this same period of time. This is 6 months after their first detection. And when you just look at our group who were biopsied within 6 months of the first detected liver test abnormalities, you can see that 72% of them had stage 2 fibrosis, completely different than what's in the literature for HIV negative people. And in fact, what I think is going on is that there is an incredibly rapid fibrosis progression. And that it accumulates over time. And this is just a simple plot of each spot here is one patient. The time from when we first found the evidence of hepatitis C to the time of the biopsy against the fibrosis stage. And so this is increasing fibrosis. And you can see with increasing time, this is only a 2-year time period right here. This is 24 months, 36 months. So over this time, you can see a very clear trend toward increasing fibrosis stage in this very short time period from the time of really this is new hepatitis infection that we're picking up. And in fact, this is a statistically significant trend. So this liver disease did not pre-exist in these men either. So not only does hepatitis C not do this, but it's not like we just sort of selected a whole bunch of people who had pre-existing liver disease. And this is sort of a laundry list that I've accumulated as people ask me questions, well, maybe they had this and maybe they had that. Maybe that's why these guys have their fibrosis. And basically, what we have is that the only thing really that's common to all these is these were men who got hepatitis C infection after their HIV infection. So this is, I think, a pretty straightforward, it's the virus doing this. And this is a rate that is almost unprecedented. So The conclusions here from New York, I'd say that we have an epidemic of new hepatitis C infection in HIV-infected men who have sex with men in New York City, similar to what was seen in Europe and in Australia. The infection is really associated with unprotected receptive sex. The good news is that when treated early, and not necessarily even in the first 6 months of infection, but really within a half a year of diagnosis, that the cure rate is 75% in our hands, which is fairly consistent with what we've seen across other studies. But for those who are missed, or those presumably who fail therapy, the fibrosis progression is rapid and significant. And so this is my public health message here. So the U.S. government has at times when they felt faced with new and very important infections, have put on large campaigns. This is from the Army in World War II, and warning against venereal disease and how important that was. And there were very, very large campaigns about that. And so our government has not been so quick in the recommendations to try screening and what to do. So I'm concerned now that this is really where we need to look. And so in the campaign against hepatitis C in this new risk group, I think it's extremely important that we educate the men themselves that they are in fact at risk from this, which is basically unknown. I think the word has gotten out better in Europe now, but it is dismal in the States. We need to educate the HIV providers to look for it. And therefore, we need a very simple enhanced surveillance, and the European guidelines have already been updated, but basically treat men who have sex with men as a risk group. Fortunately, HIV-infected men are in care, and it makes it a lot easier to screen. So we need to change the screening recommendations in the U.S. This is extremely urgent. It's so simple, just measuring liver tests and hepatitis C serology. And because we need to find everybody to make the diagnosis, to get them treated, to prevent what I think is really a potentially disastrous liver disease epidemic in this group. So thank you.